My name is Natasha Pemberton, 29 years old, and last Tuesday evening, my husband of 3 years looked me straight in the eye and called me a failure. What he didn't know was that by Thursday night, his own family would discover I was the founder of a company worth $47 million. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. Let me take you back to where this all began, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about a marriage built on lies. It's about what happens when someone you love refuses to see who you really are, and how sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing when it comes to serving justice. My husband, Derek Pemberton, is what you'd call traditionally successful. Investment banker at Hartwell & Associates in downtown Millbrook Heights, drives a BMW, wears suits that cost more than most people's rent. The kind of man who measures worth in salary figures and job titles. The kind of man who, when we first met at a charity gala 3 years ago, was immediately drawn to my designer dress and the way I carried myself in those circles. What he never bothered to ask was how a woman in her mid-20s could afford to move so confidently through his world of old money and established names. You see, Derek fell in love with what he thought I was. Natasha, the pretty socialite with mysterious family money. Someone ornamental enough to complement his rising career, sophisticated enough to handle his business dinners, but never successful enough to overshadow him. I let him believe this version of me because, honestly, it was easier than explaining the truth. The truth that at 24, I had founded Cascade Solutions, a tech consulting firm that specialized in helping small businesses streamline their digital operations. What started as freelance work from my tiny studio apartment in Riverside District had grown into something I never expected. By the time I met Derek, Cascade Solutions employed 43 people and had contracts with companies across 3 states. But I've always been private about my business life. Call it paranoia, call it wisdom. But in the tech world, you learn quickly that not everyone needs to know your success story, especially when you're a young woman in an industry that loves to dismiss you as lucky rather than skilled. So when Derek and I started dating, I kept things simple. I told him I worked in consulting, did some freelance projects, nothing too specific. He never pressed for details, too absorbed in talking about his own career trajectory. When we got engaged after 18 months, I figured there would be time to explain everything properly after the wedding. When we married and moved into his family's sprawling estate in Thornfield Manor, I thought we'd settle into honesty. I was wrong. Because Derek didn't want a successful wife. He wanted a wife who made him feel successful. This became crystal clear last Tuesday during his family's monthly dinner at the Pemberton estate. Picture this: mahogany dining room, crystal chandelier, his parents, Harold and Constance Pemberton, holding court like they're running a board meeting instead of passing the roast. His younger brother Trevor was there with his fiancée, Emily Richardson, a sharp-eyed woman who works in venture capital and never misses a detail. The conversation, as always, turned to career updates. Harold was pontificating about some merger at his law firm. Constance was discussing her latest philanthropic committee position. Derek was explaining his recent promotion to senior analyst, chest puffed with pride. Then Trevor asked the question that started everything. "And Natasha, how's the consulting work going? Derek mentioned you've been struggling to find steady clients lately." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. I glanced at Derek, waiting for him to correct his brother, to explain that I hadn't been struggling at all, that just last month, Cascade Solutions had signed our biggest contract yet with Morrison Industries, a deal worth $2.3 million over 2 years. Instead, Derek laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, you know how it is with these freelance things," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Natasha tries, but it's not exactly a real business, more like a hobby that occasionally pays for her shopping trips." The table fell silent, not because anyone was shocked by his casual cruelty, but because they were all waiting to see how I'd react. This was clearly a dynamic they'd witnessed before. Derek diminishing me staying quiet, everyone pretending it was normal. Constance jumped in with practiced smoothness. "Well, not everyone can handle the pressure of a real career. It's perfectly fine to dabble, dear." "Exactly," Derek continued, gaining momentum from his mother's support. "I keep telling her she should just focus on planning charity events or something suitable. This consulting thing?" He shook his head like I was a child playing dress-up. "It's sweet that she tries, but let's be honest. She's failed at making it into anything substantial. I think it's time she accepts reality and maybe looks into something more appropriate for her skill level."
The word failed hung in the air like poison. I set my fork down carefully, my hands surprisingly steady. Around the table, I could feel the family's eyes on me, waiting for me to shrink, to apologize, to accept their verdict on my worth. Instead, I smiled. "You're absolutely right, Derek," I said quietly. "I should definitely accept reality." That's when I excused myself to the powder room, pulled out my phone, and made a decision that would change everything. Because in 48 hours, Derek's family would be hosting their annual business networking event, where the Pembertons loved to parade their connections and influence. And for the first time since I'd married into this family, I was going to attend as exactly who I really was. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Amelie Richardson's venture capital firm had been trying to schedule a meeting with me for 6 months. They wanted to discuss a potential investment in Cascade Solutions' expansion into the European market. The meeting that would finally happen this Thursday night at the Pemberton family networking event, in front of everyone. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. The drive home from Thornfield Manor was silent. Derek hummed along to the radio, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beside him in the passenger seat. He actually seemed pleased with himself, as if publicly humiliating me had somehow improved his standing with his family. "Good dinner tonight," he said, pulling into our driveway. "I think my parents are finally warming up to the idea that you're more, realistic about your limitations now." Realistic about my limitations. The words echoed in my head as I unlocked our front door, Derek chattering behind me about some client meeting he had scheduled for tomorrow. He had no idea that while he was discussing quarterly projections, I would be fielding calls from 3 different companies wanting to expand their contracts with Cascade Solutions. That night, while Derek snored peacefully beside me, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our marriage forever. But it wasn't born from anger or spite. It was born from clarity. For 3 years, I had been living a lie. Not because I was ashamed of my success, but because I thought I was protecting Derek's ego. I thought I was being a supportive wife. What Tuesday's dinner had shown me was that Derek didn't just not know who I was. He didn't want to know who I was. He had built his entire perception of our marriage around me being lesser than him. My failure wasn't a disappointment to him. It was a requirement. So at 2:17 a.m., sitting in my home office while Derek slept, I opened my laptop and began crafting what would become the most important email series of my personal life. The first email went to Amelie Richardson at Whitmore Ventures. Subject: REE Cascade Solutions Partnership Discussion. Dear Miss Richardson, thank you for your continued interest in scheduling a meeting regarding Cascade Solutions' European expansion. I understand your firm has been trying to coordinate our calendars for several months. I'm writing to confirm that I will be available this Thursday evening after 7 p.m. for our discussion. I believe you mentioned you'll be attending the Pemberton Family Networking event at Thornfield Manor. What a coincidence. I'll be there as well. I look forward to finally connecting in person. Best regards, Natasha Pemberton, founder and CEO, Cascade Solutions. The second email went to my assistant, Cameron Mills, who had been managing my calendar and public appearances for 2 years. Cameron, change of plans for Thursday. I'll need you to prepare the full company portfolio, including the Morrison Industries contract details, Q3 revenue reports, and the European expansion projections. Also, confirm my attendance at the Pemberton networking event and ensure all my business cards are updated with the Thornfield Manor address. It's time to stop hiding. Natasha. The third email was the most strategic. It went to Jessica Chen, a business journalist at Metro Commerce Weekly who had been requesting an interview with me for 8 months. Jessica, I'm ready for that interview we discussed. Thursday evening would work perfectly. I'll be at a networking event in Thornfield Manor starting at 6 p.m. It would be a great opportunity for you to see Cascade Solutions in action in a social business setting. The story angle you mentioned about young female entrepreneurs in the tech space, I think I'm finally ready to tell that story publicly. Natasha Pemberton, Cascade Solutions. But the real masterstroke wasn't the emails. It was the phone call I made Wednesday morning to Harold Pemberton's law firm. Pemberton Associates and Webb, this is Patricia speaking. Hi, Patricia. This is Natasha Pemberton, Derek's wife. I was wondering if I could speak with Harold about the networking event tomorrow evening. Of course, dear. He's in a meeting, but I can take a message. Actually, this is perfect. Could you add Cascade Solutions to the sponsor list for the event? We'd like to contribute to the business community showcase they're doing. I can send over our company profile and a sponsorship check this afternoon. There was a pause. Cascade Solutions, is that your, consulting work? Something like that, I said, smiling to myself. Harold will understand when he sees the materials. By Wednesday afternoon, everything was in motion. Cameron had messengered over our company portfolio to Harold's office. 47 pages of client testimonials, revenue growth charts, and expansion plans that painted a very different picture of my failed consulting hobby. The sponsorship check for $15,000 was paperclipped to the front page. Harold called me personally that evening. Natasha, I have to say, I'm surprised by these materials. Derek mentioned your consulting work was more of a side project. Derek knows I work hard, I said carefully. Perhaps we just haven't had the chance to discuss the details thoroughly. There was a long pause. Well, these numbers are quite impressive. We'd be honored to have Cascade Solutions as a featured sponsor tomorrow evening. Should I mention this to Derek? I think I'd like to surprise him, I said. You know how modest I am about these things. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable clarity. The October sky was sharp blue, the kind of day that made everything feel possible. Derek left for work with his usual kiss on my forehead and casual reminder that I should try to network a bit at his family's event. You never know. Maybe you'll meet someone who needs basic administrative help or something. I watched him drive away from our bedroom window, then spent the day in final preparations. Hair appointment at 2 p.m., the navy blue Armani suit I'd been saving for special occasions, the Cartier watch my company had bought me after our first $1 million year, still in its box because I'd never felt safe wearing it around Derek's family. By 5 p.m., I was standing in front of our full-length mirror, looking at a version of myself Derek had never seen. Not Natasha the failed freelancer, not Natasha the suitable wife. Natasha Pemberton, founder and CDO of Cascade Solutions. As I drove toward Thornfield Manor, my phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. Jessica Chen confirmed for 7:30. Amelia Richardson's assistant confirmed she'll have the full Whitmore Ventures team with her. The portfolio materials are already at the venue. One more text made me smile. Morrison Industries just called. They want to expand the contract to include their West Coast operations, $4.2 million over 3 years. Derek thought I had failed. By tonight, everyone would know exactly how wrong he was.
The Pemberton Family Networking event happened twice a year, spring and fall, in the grand ballroom of Thornfield Manor. 100 guests, local business leaders, politicians, and Derek's extended network of finance professionals. The kind of event where deals were made over cocktails and reputations were built on handshakes. The kind of event where secrets couldn't stay hidden for long. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I could see Derek's BMW already there, along with dozens of other luxury cars. Through the tall windows, I could make out the familiar figures of his family, holding court as always. For 3 years, I had attended these events as Derek's pretty, quiet wife. Tonight, I was walking in as myself, and Derek had no idea what was about to hit him. The grand ballroom of Thornfield Manor buzzed with the familiar energy of ambitious people making connections. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over clusters of guests holding champagne flutes and business cards, their conversations a careful dance of networking and social positioning. I had attended enough of these events to know the rhythm. The strategic introductions, the practiced small talk, the subtle sizing up of everyone's worth and influence. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, I wasn't observing from the sidelines as Derek's wife. I was a player. I entered through the main doors at exactly 6:15 p.m., fashionably late enough to make an entrance, but early enough to watch the evening unfold. The first person I spotted was Constance Pemberton, Derek's mother, resplendent in emerald silk and holding court near the ice sculpture. Her eyes found me immediately, and I saw her face shift into that practiced smile she reserved for family obligations. "Natasha, darling, how lovely that you could make it. Derek mentioned you might be too busy with your projects to attend." I wouldn't miss it, especially since Cascade Solutions is one of tonight's featured sponsors. The smile froze on her face. "I'm sorry, what?" Before I could respond, Harold Pemberton appeared at his wife's elbow, his expression carefully neutral in that way lawyers perfect when they're processing unexpected information. "Natasha, we need to discuss those materials you sent over. There seems to be some confusion about—" "Dad, there you are!" Derek's voice cut through the conversation as he approached our little circle, martini in hand, and looking perfectly at ease in his element. He kissed my cheek absently, the kind of perfunctory gesture that had become second nature in our marriage. "I see you've met my wife, though I should warn you, she has some pretty creative ideas about business." Harold's eyebrows raised slightly. "Creative is certainly one way to put it." "What are you all discussing so seriously?" Derek asked, taking a sip of his drink. "Your wife's sponsorship of tonight's event," Constance said slowly, her eyes never leaving my face. Derek laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Sponsorship? Natasha, what did you tell them? You know how your freelance work can sound more impressive than it actually is when you phrase it the right way."
The condescension in his voice was automatic, reflexive. He wasn't even trying to embarrass me. This was simply how he spoke about my work, so naturally that he didn't realize how it sounded to his parents. "Derek," Harold said carefully, "perhaps you should look at the materials Natasha provided. The check alone—" "Check?" Derek's laugh became uncertain. "What check? Natasha, you didn't actually write them a check, did you? Please tell me you didn't promise money we don't have for some kind of networking fee." The conversation was attracting attention now. A small circle of guests had started to gather, drawn by the tension in our voices and the increasingly uncomfortable body language of the Pemberton family patriarch. That's when I saw her across the room. Amelie Richardson, Trevor's fiancée, deep in conversation with 2 men in expensive suits. She caught my eye and started walking over, her expression curious and alert. Behind her, I recognized the woman she'd been talking to, Jessica Chen from Metro Commerce Weekly, digital recorder already in her hand. "Actually," I said, turning back to Derek with perfect calm, "I think there might be some confusion. Let me clarify things for everyone." I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. Not the simple white ones I used to carry with just my name and phone number, but the new ones Cameron had prepared. Thick cardstock, embossed lettering, company logo prominently displayed. I handed it to Derek first. His eyes scanned the card, and I watched his face change as he read. "Natasha Pemberton, founder and CEO, Cascade Solutions." Below that, in smaller print, "Comprehensive digital solutions for growing businesses. Founded 2019, serving clients across the tri-state area." "I don't understand," he said slowly.
This says founder? Because I am the founder, I replied simply. Cascade Solutions is my company, Derek. I built it from nothing 5 years ago. We employ 43 people full-time and have clients in 7 states. Harold cleared his throat. The check was for $15,000, Derek, from their corporate account. 15,000? Derek's voice climbed an octave. Natasha, where did you get $15,000? Before I could answer, Amelie Richardson reached our group, her smile bright and professional. Natasha, finally we get to meet in person. She extended her hand warmly. Amelie Richardson from Whitmore Ventures. We've been trying to schedule time with you for months. Derek stared at his brother's fiancée like she'd started speaking a foreign language. You two know each other? Know each other? Amelie laughed. Natasha's company is one of the most promising tech consultancies in the region. We've been courting Cascade Solutions for a potential Series A investment round. The word investment hung in the air like a revelation. Around us, the gathering crowd of guests had grown larger, drawn by the unmistakable energy of drama unfolding in real time. Jessica Chen appeared next to Amelia, digital recorder discreetly positioned. Ms. Pemberton, would now be a good time for that interview we discussed? I'd love to hear more about Cascade Solutions' expansion plans. Derek's martini glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the ballroom. Interview, he whispered. For Metro Commerce Weekly, she said brightly. We're doing a feature series on young entrepreneurs who've built successful companies. Natasha's story is particularly compelling, building a multi-million-dollar business while maintaining such a low public profile. Multi-million? The words came out as a croak. Harold placed a steadying hand on his son's arm. Derek, perhaps we should step outside for a moment to discuss. No, Derek said, his voice gaining strength, a shock transformed into something harder. No, I want to understand this right now, in front of everyone. He turned to face me fully, his eyes blazing with a mixture of confusion and rising anger. Are you telling me that for 3 years of our marriage, you've been lying to me about having some kind of major business? The ballroom had gone quiet now, at least our corner of it. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on us, could sense phones being discreetly positioned to capture whatever was about to happen. I never lied to you, Derek. I said I worked in consulting. I told you I had clients. You just never asked for details. Details? His voice was getting louder now. Carry you across the marble floors. You call owning a multi-million-dollar company details? I call it my job. The same job you've been calling a failure for the past 3 years. Constance made a small, sharp sound. Not quite a gasp, but close to it. Around us, I could see guests pulling out phones, could hear the subtle buzz of whispered conversations starting up. Trevor appeared at Amelie's side, confused and concerned. What's going on? Derek, why are you shouting? Your fiancé just informed me that my wife apparently owns a major business that she's been hiding from me for our entire marriage. Hiding? I asked. Derek, my office is in our house. I take calls there every day. I have client meetings, employee reviews, budget discussions. When did you think I was doing when I said I was working? You thought I was playing around on my computer, he exploded. You thought I was pretending to be important to make myself feel better about not having a real career. The silence that followed was deafening.
Jessica Chen's recorder was definitely running now. Amelie's eyes were wide with fascination. Harold looked like he was calculating legal ramifications. Constance appeared to be in shock. And Derek. Derek looked like a man whose entire understanding of his world had just crumbled. Well, said a voice from behind me, smooth and amused, this is certainly more entertaining than the usual Pemberton family networking event. I turned to see Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison Industries, my biggest client, approaching our group with a martini and a knowing smile. Derek's face went white, because if Richard Morrison was here, if he was walking over to join our conversation with that look of recognition on his face, then everyone was about to learn exactly how successful my failed consulting hobby really was. Richard Morrison's presence changed everything. The CEO of Morrison Industries wasn't just another networking event attendee.
He was a titan in the regional business community, the kind of man whose endorsement could make careers and whose disapproval could end them. When he walked over to our increasingly tense circle, every conversation within a 20-foot radius stopped. "Natasha," Richard said warmly, extending his hand with genuine respect. "I was hoping I'd run into you tonight. We need to discuss the West Coast expansion timeline. My board is extremely impressed with the preliminary proposals your team submitted." Derek's face cycled through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and something that looked dangerously close to panic. "I'm sorry, but there must be a mistake. You're talking to my wife about business proposals?" Richard's eyebrows rose slightly as he turned to Derek with polite interest. "Your wife? How wonderful. You must be very proud. Cascade Solutions has revolutionized our entire digital infrastructure. The efficiency improvements alone have saved us over $800,000 this year." The number hit Derek like a physical blow. I watched him process it. $800,000 in savings meant Cascade Solutions was handling contracts worth significantly more than that. His face went ashen as the mathematical implications sank in. $800,000, Derek repeated faintly. "That's just the savings. The actual contract value is substantially higher. Natasha, your team's work on our supply chain optimization has been remarkable. We're looking at expanding the partnership to include our European operations as well." Harold Pemberton stepped forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in as he processed the magnitude of what he was hearing. "Mr. Morrison, when you say substantially higher, could you perhaps quantify that for us?" Richard glanced at me, seeking permission. I nodded slightly. "The current 2-year contract is valued at $2.3 million. With the proposed expansions we're discussing, we're looking at closer to $6.5 million over the next 3 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound, like a fish gasping for air. Constance clutched her pearl necklace so tightly I thought the strand might snap. Even Jessica Chen had stopped pretending to be discreet with her recording device. $6.5 million? Trevor finally whispered, staring at me like a stranger. From Morrison Industries? Amelie added helpfully, "From what our research shows, Cascade Solutions has contracts with at least 12 major clients across the tri-state area." Derek turned to stare at me with an expression cycling between bewilderment and something that looked almost like fear. 12 clients? 14, actually, I corrected gently. We signed 2 more last month. That's when Margaret Blackstone appeared at the edge of our group. Margaret was the senior vice president at Hartwell & Associates, Derek's boss's boss. A woman whose approval Derek had been desperately seeking for 3 years, whose recommendation could make or break his career trajectory at the investment firm. "Excuse me," Margaret said with a voice that carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Did I hear correctly that we're talking about Cascade Solutions?" Derek's face went from pale to greenish. His boss's boss was now part of this conversation, witnessing his public meltdown over his wife's secret success. "Margaret," Harold said smoothly, falling back on his social hosting duties, "I'd like you to meet my daughter-in-law, Natasha Pemberton." "Oh, we've met," Margaret said with a smile that was both warm and sharp. "Professionally speaking, Cascade Solutions handles the digital consulting for 3 of our major client portfolios. Natasha, your team's analysis of the Henderson Group's operational inefficiencies was brilliant. You saved them, and us, a considerable amount of money." Derek made a sound that might have been a whimper. "The Henderson Group? That's one of our biggest clients." "Exactly, which is why I was so pleased when they brought in Cascade Solutions for the consultation. Though I have to say I'm surprised to discover you're married to our consultant. You never mentioned your wife ran such an impressive operation." The trap was closing around Derek, and everyone could see it. For 3 years, he had dismissed my work as a failed hobby while my company was actively contributing to the success of his own firm's clients. The irony was so perfect, it felt scripted. Cameron Mills appeared at my elbow, tablet in hand, and looking every inch the professional executive assistant he was. "Miss Pemberton, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have the Henderson Group online too. They're ready to discuss the Phase 3 implementation timeline." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Could you take a message?
I'll call them back within the hour." Cameron nodded and disappeared as efficiently as he'd appeared, leaving behind another layer of evidence about the scope and professionalism of my operation. Derek was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "You have an assistant?" "I have 3 assistants," I corrected. Cameron manages my calendar and client communications. Sarah handles our marketing and public relations. David coordinates our technical teams. "Technical teams?" Derek's voice cracked slightly. "We have 43 full-time employees," Amelia supplied helpfully, plus a network of freelance specialists they bring in for specialized projects. Margaret Blackstone was watching this exchange with the fascinated attention of someone witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "Derek, I have to ask, how did you not know about your wife's company? I mean, the Henderson Group contract alone required months of preliminary meetings and presentations." Derek started, then stopped. The truth was too humiliating to say out loud. That he had been so dismissive of my work, so convinced of my irrelevance, that he had never bothered to pay attention to what I actually did. That's when Jessica Chen stepped forward, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged by the drama unfolding before her. "This is fascinating from a business perspective," she said, addressing the group but clearly speaking for her article. "We often hear about successful entrepreneurs who maintain low public profiles, but it's rare to see someone who's kept their success hidden even from their immediate family." "She didn't hide it from family," Harold said slowly, his legal mind clearly working through the implications. "She sponsored tonight's event through her company. She provided detailed financial documentation. The information was available to anyone who bothered to look." The accusation hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Derek hadn't bothered to look. "The real question," Margaret continued, her tone thoughtful, "is what this means for Derek's position at Hartwell. I mean, having a spouse who is actively working with our clients creates some interesting considerations." Derek's face went white. "What kind of considerations?" "Well, conflict of interest policies, for one thing, disclosure requirements. The partners will need to be informed about the family connection to one of our consulting vendors." I watched Derek realize that his wife's success wasn't just embarrassing, it was potentially threatening to his career. The same success he had spent years mocking could now jeopardize his professional standing if not properly managed. "Of course," Margaret added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "this could also be seen as a tremendous asset. Having that kind of inside track to a high-performing consulting firm could be very valuable for the right person." The implication was clear. Derek's career prospects now depended entirely on how well he handled the revelation of his wife's success, the same wife he had been publicly diminishing for 3 years. Richard Morrison checked his watch. "Natasha, I hate to interrupt this family reunion, but do you have a moment to discuss those expansion timelines? The board meeting is Monday, and I'd like to have preliminary numbers to present." "Of course," I said, excusing myself from the group with polite grace. As I walked away with Richard, I could hear Derek's voice behind me, desperate and shaking. "Wait, Natasha, we need to talk about this. We need to discuss what this means for us." But I was already deep in conversation with my biggest client, discussing million-dollar contracts and expansion strategies, while Derek stood in the wreckage of his assumptions about our marriage. The foundation of his identity as the successful one in our relationship had just crumbled in front of his family, his colleagues, and the local business press, and we were only an hour into the evening. My conversation with Richard Morrison lasted exactly 12 minutes, but those 12 minutes were enough to seal Derek's fate. While we discussed quarterly projections and European market penetration strategies near the champagne fountain, I could see Derek across the ballroom surrounded by an ever-growing circle of guests who had heard fragments of our earlier exchange.
Word travels fast in circles like these, especially when the story involves someone's carefully constructed image crumbling in real time. I watched as Derek's colleagues from Hartwell and Associates gravitated toward him with the predatory curiosity of sharks sensing blood in the water. The Henderson Group implementation should be complete by December, Richard was saying, but his eyes kept drifting toward the commotion Derek was creating. Your husband seems genuinely shocked by your success. Derek prefers to focus on his own career, I said diplomatically. He's very dedicated to his work at Hartwell. Richard's tone was neutral, but I caught the subtle implication. In business circles, a man who didn't know his wife ran a multi-million-dollar company wasn't just inattentive, he was either willfully ignorant or completely self-absorbed. Neither quality inspired confidence in professional settings. That's when the evening took its most dramatic turn. Harold Pemberton had clearly decided that damage control was necessary. I watched as he approached the small podium at the front of the ballroom, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. The conversations gradually died down as guests turned toward their host. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment," Harold began, his lawyer's voice easily carrying across the marble floors. "As you know, tonight's networking event is made possible by our generous sponsors, and I'd like to take a moment to recognize their contributions to our business community."
This was standard protocol for these events. A brief acknowledgement of sponsors, some networking encouragement, maybe a toast to successful partnerships. What Harold said next, however, was anything but standard. "I'd particularly like to recognize our featured sponsor this evening, Cascade Solutions, represented here tonight by their founder and CEO, Natasha Pemberton." The polite applause began automatically, but then Harold continued. "What makes this sponsorship particularly meaningful is that Natasha is also my daughter-in-law, and I'm embarrassed to admit that until tonight, our family didn't fully appreciate the scope and success of her remarkable company." The applause faltered as guests processed the unusual nature of Harold's admission. Across the room, I could see Derek's face cycling through horror, embarrassment, and desperate signaling for his father to stop talking. Harold didn't stop. Cascade Solutions, I've learned tonight, employs over 40 people and maintains contracts worth millions of dollars with some of the most respected companies in our region, including several clients of my son Derek's firm, Hartwell and Associates. The ballroom was now completely silent except for Harold's voice. This wasn't a typical sponsor recognition. This was a public confession, and everyone could sense it. "I think this is a wonderful example of how we sometimes overlook the achievements right in front of us, particularly when those achievements belong to someone we think we know well." Jessica Chen had moved closer to the front, her recorder held high, and her eyes bright with the knowledge that she was witnessing something unprecedented. Other guests had pulled out their phones, some recording video, others frantically typing what could only be social media updates. So please join me in celebrating not just Cascade Solutions' sponsorship of tonight's event, but also the reminder that success comes in many forms, and wisdom sometimes means recognizing what we failed to see. The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain. Guests were clapping, but their eyes were darting between Harold, Derek, and me, trying to piece together the full story from the fragments they'd overheard. Margaret Blackstone chose that moment to approach the podium. As Harold stepped back, she took the microphone with the confidence of someone who had navigated corporate politics for decades. "Thank you, Harold. I'd like to add something, if I may." Her voice carried the authority of her position at one of the region's most prestigious investment firms. As many of you know, Hartwell and Associates prides itself on identifying and partnering with the most innovative consulting firms in the market. What I learned tonight is that one of our most successful vendor relationships has been with Cascade Solutions. She paused, her eyes finding Derek in the crowd.
What makes this particularly noteworthy is that Derek Pemberton, one of our rising analysts, apparently had no idea that his wife was the CEO of one of our key consulting partners. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was audible. Margaret had just publicly highlighted Derek's professional oversight in front of every important business contact in the region. This raises some interesting questions about communication, awareness, and the importance of truly understanding the people closest to us, both personally and professionally. Derek's face had gone beyond pale to a sickly gray color. I could see him scanning the room desperately, looking for an escape route, or at least a friendly face, but finding neither. Margaret continued, her tone remaining professionally neutral while delivering what amounted to a public dissection. At Hartwell, we value analysts who demonstrate comprehensive awareness of their professional environment. The ability to identify opportunities, recognize valuable partnerships, and maintain strategic relationships is crucial to success in our industry. The implication was devastating. Derek had failed to recognize the most valuable professional relationship in his own household. I'm sure Derek will be eager to leverage this family connection to strengthen Hartwell's partnership with Cascade Solutions. It's wonderful when personal and professional worlds align so fortuitously. She returned the microphone to Harold and walked back into the crowd, leaving Derek standing alone in a circle of space that seemed to expand as people subtly stepped away from him. Trevor appeared at Derek's side, looking mortified on his brother's behalf. I could see him whispering urgently, probably suggesting they leave, but Derek seemed frozen in place. That's when Emily Richardson made her way to the podium. "If I could just add one more thought," she said, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who worked in venture capital and was accustomed to evaluating worth. From an investment perspective, what's most impressive about Cascade Solutions isn't just their financial success, but their strategic discretion. In an age where entrepreneurs often over-promote their achievements, Natasha has built a remarkable company while maintaining an incredibly low profile. She looked directly at Derek as she continued. Of course, discretion can sometimes be mistaken for insignificance by people who aren't paying enough attention. Tonight has been a wonderful reminder that the most valuable assets aren't always the most visible ones. The crowd was completely engaged now, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be discussed in business circles for months. Phones were everywhere, capturing not just the words, but Derek's visible deterioration as each speaker highlighted his blindness to his wife's success. Whittemore Ventures is honored to be in discussions with Cascade Solutions about potential investment opportunities. We look forward to supporting Natasha's vision for expansion into new markets.
As she stepped away from the podium, I realized that what had started as a family networking event had become something else entirely, a public trial of Derek's credibility, both personal and professional. And the verdict was already clear. Derek stood in the center of the ballroom, isolated and diminished, while his wife's success was celebrated by his family, his colleagues, and his professional community. The man who had spent 3 years calling me a failure was now facing the public recognition of his own failure, the failure to see, to listen, and to value the person closest to him. The evening was far from over, but Derek's reputation was already in ruins. The aftermath of the podium speeches was electric. The ballroom buzzed with conversations that were no longer about quarterly earnings or market projections. They were about Derek Pemberton's spectacular failure to recognize his wife's success. I watched from my position near the windows as clusters of guests formed and reformed, their animated discussions punctuated by pointed glances in Derek's direction. He stood near the ice sculpture like a man in a trance, his expensive suit suddenly looking less impressive, his usual confident posture replaced by something that resembled a deflated balloon. Trevor had given up trying to coax him toward the exit and was now standing with Emily, both of them watching Derek with a mixture of concern and fascination. That's when Derek seemed to snap back to awareness. His eyes found me across the room, and I saw something shift in his expression. Desperation mixed with anger, like a cornered animal deciding whether to flee or fight. He chose to fight. Derek pushed through the crowd with none of his usual social grace, bumping into guests and mumbling apologies without making eye contact. When he reached me, his face was flushed and his breathing was slightly elevated. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "right now." "I'm in the middle of a conversation with," I began, gesturing toward Richard Morrison and two other executives who had been discussing potential partnerships with Cascade Solutions. "I don't care," Derek interrupted, loud enough that nearby conversations paused. "This is my wife, gentlemen, and we have some urgent personal matters to discuss." The possessive emphasis on "my wife" was clearly intentional, a desperate attempt to reassert some kind of authority in a situation where he had none. Richard Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly at the interruption, but he stepped back politely. "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "Natasha, we can continue this discussion tomorrow. Derek, congratulations on having such an accomplished wife. You must be very proud." The irony in Richard's tone was subtle but unmistakable. Derek's jaw tightened as he processed the implied criticism. "Extremely proud," Derek replied through gritted teeth. "We're very close. We share everything." I almost laughed at the absurdity of the statement, given that he had just learned about my company's existence 2 hours ago, but I maintained my composure as Richard and the other executives excused themselves. Derek grabbed my elbow, not roughly, but with enough pressure to make his desperation clear. "Outside, now." He guided me toward the French doors that led to the manor's elaborate gardens, past clusters of guests who watched our exit with undisguised interest. I could see Jessica Chen tracking our movement, her journalist instincts telling me that the main event was far from over. The October air was crisp against my skin as we stepped onto the stone terrace overlooking Harold's meticulously maintained rose garden. The sounds of the networking event became muffled behind us, replaced by the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of autumn leaves. Derek released my arm and immediately began pacing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized from his most stressful moments at work. "What the hell is happening in there?" he demanded, his voice carrying clearly in the cool night air. "What kind of game are you playing?" "I'm not playing a game, Derek. I'm attending a networking event where my company is a featured sponsor." "Your company?" He whirled to face me, his eyes wild. "Since when do you have a company? Since when do you have millions of dollars in contracts? Since when do you have employees and assistants and business relationships with my colleagues?" "Since 5 years ago," I replied calmly. "Since before we even met." The answer seemed to physically stagger him. He leaned against the stone balustrade as if he needed the support. "5 years," he repeated. "You've been lying to me for our entire relationship." "I never lied to you, Derek. You just never bothered to listen." "Don't." His voice cracked on the word. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. You deliberately hid this from me. You let me think you were, what? A failure? A disappointment? Someone whose work was so insignificant that you could dismiss it at dinner parties?" Derek's face twisted with something between guilt and fury. "That's not fair. You never told me the scope of what you were doing. You never asked." The words came out sharper than I intended, 3 years of suppressed frustration finally finding their voice. For 3 years, Derek, every time I mentioned my work, you changed the subject or made some condescending comment about my little projects. You didn't want to know about my success because it threatened your narrative of being the important one in this marriage.
He was quiet for a moment, and I could see him processing this, trying to find an angle that would make him the victim instead of the villain. "So what was tonight?" he asked finally. "Some kind of elaborate revenge scheme? You decided to humiliate me in front of my family and colleagues?" "Tonight was me attending a business event as myself instead of as your diminished wife. The humiliation is entirely self-inflicted. Derek began pacing again, his movements agitated and erratic. Do you have any idea what you've done to my career? Margaret Blackstone basically called me incompetent in front of half the regional business community. My credibility is destroyed. Your credibility was already destroyed, Derek. You just didn't know it yet. Tonight you learned that your wife's company has been working with your firm's clients for 2 years, and you were completely oblivious to it. That doesn't speak well for your professional awareness. He stopped pacing and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, not just anger, but genuine fear. "What do you want from me?" he asked quietly. "Do you want me to apologize? Fine. I'm sorry I didn't pay more attention to your work. I'm sorry I didn't realize how successful you were. Now, can we fix this? Can we figure out a way to spin this positively?" The word spin revealed everything about how Derek's mind worked. Even now, facing the complete collapse of his assumptions about our marriage, his instinct was to find a way to manage the narrative rather than confront the truth. "There's nothing to spin, Derek. This is simply who I am and who I've always been. The only thing that's changed is that you can no longer pretend otherwise." "But people are going to ask questions," he said desperately. "They're going to want to know how I didn't know about my wife's business. They're going to wonder what else I don't know about my own household. And what will you tell them?" Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak. I don't know." Through the French doors, I could see the networking event continuing without us. Guests were mingling, deals were being discussed, connections were being made. The business world was moving forward, while Derek stood paralyzed by the revelation that his world wasn't what he thought it was. I need you to help me fix this," he said suddenly, his voice taking on a pleading quality I had never heard before. "Come back inside with me. Let's present a united front. We can say we kept your business private for security reasons, or because we wanted to avoid conflicts of interest, or—" "No." The word stopped him mid-sentence. "No, Derek. I won't help you create another fiction to protect your ego. I won't pretend that your ignorance was actually strategic discretion. I won't be your accomplice in rewriting history to make you look better." His face went through several emotions at once: shock, anger, desperation, and something that might have been heartbreak if I thought he was capable of loving anything more than his own image. "You're my wife," he said finally, and the words sounded like a plea. "Yes, I am. But I'm also Natasha Pemberton, founder and CEO of Cascade Solutions. And for the first time in 3 years, everyone knows both of those things." The silence that followed stretched between us like a chasm. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of laughter from the ballroom, the tinkle of champagne glasses, the hum of successful people making successful connections. The business world was moving forward, while Derek stood paralyzed by the revelation that his world wasn't what he thought it was. The 3 days that followed the networking event passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Derek went to work each morning as if nothing had changed, putting on his expensive suits and driving his BMW to Hartwell and Associates. But I could see the cracks in his facade. He moved through our house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary, and spending most of his time locked in his home office making hushed phone calls. I knew what those calls were about: damage control, reputation management, desperate attempts to salvage his professional standing before the story spread further through the business community. On Friday morning, I found a handwritten note on my desk in the home office Derek had always dismissed as my computer room. The paper was expensive stationery, the kind Derek used for important correspondence, and his handwriting was more careful than usual, as if he drafted it multiple times. "Natasha, I know I handled everything wrong on Tuesday night. I know I've been handling everything wrong for 3 years. I need a chance to fix this, not just for my career, but for us. Can we meet somewhere neutral? Somewhere we can talk without the pressure of family or colleagues watching? I think I understand now what I failed to see before, and I need you to know that I want to change. There's a small cafe called Brewstones on Maple Avenue in Riverside District. It's quiet, private. No one from our usual circles goes there. Would you meet me there tomorrow at 2 p.m.? Please, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for one more chance to show you that I can be the husband you need me to be. Derek.
I stared at the letter for a long time, feeling a complex mixture of emotions I hadn't expected. There was a part of me, a small, tired part, that remembered falling in love with Derek 3 years ago, that wanted to believe he could change, that wanted to give him the chance he was asking for. But there was a larger part of me that recognized the patterns in his language. Even in this letter asking for forgiveness, Derek was focused on what he needed to fix his career, to change his image, to become the husband I needed him to be. It was still about his performance, his transformation, his control of the narrative. Still, I found myself typing a response. I'll be there. Brewstones was exactly as Derek had described, a small, dimly lit cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a vintage clothing shop in the kind of neighborhood where Derek would never normally spend time. The tables were mismatched, the floor was worn hardwood, and the clientele consisted mostly of graduate students and freelance writers working on laptops. I arrived first, choosing a corner table where we could have privacy but where I could also see the entrance. Derek walked in at exactly 2 p.m., looking oddly diminished in the casual setting. Without his usual backdrop of marble lobbies and mahogany conference rooms, he seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. He had traded his typical 3-piece suit for khakis and a sweater, an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, but was clearly his attempt to seem approachable and humble. The effort was transparent, but not entirely without effect. "Thank you for coming," he said as he settled into the chair across from me. His voice was quieter than usual, lacking the confident projection he used in professional settings. "You said you wanted to talk." Derek nodded, then seemed to gather himself before speaking. "I've been thinking about Tuesday night, about everything that happened, about everything that's been happening for the past 3 years that I apparently missed." He paused, clearly expecting some kind of response from me, but I remained silent. "I talked to Margaret yesterday, officially, in her office about the conflict of interest situation with Cascade Solutions and Hartwell's clients. This was the conversation I had been expecting." "What did she say?" "She was professional, very professional, too professional." Derek's smile was rueful. "She explained that the company needs to formalize the relationship between Hartwell and Cascade Solutions now that the family connection is public knowledge. New contracts, transparent billing, ethical oversight committees." That sounds reasonable. It is reasonable. It's also a complete restructuring of partnerships that have been working smoothly for 2 years, partnerships I knew nothing about. He met my eyes for the first time since sitting down. "Natasha, do you understand how that makes me look? My wife's company has been doing millions of dollars worth of business with my firm's clients, and I was completely oblivious to it?" "How does it make you look, Derek?" "It makes me look incompetent, inattentive, like someone who doesn't understand the basic landscape of his own professional environment." I nodded slowly. "And how do you think it made me feel when you dismissed my work as a failure in front of your family?" Derek winced as if I had slapped him. "That's different." "Is it? How?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his untouched coffee. When he looked up again, his expression was more honest than I had seen in years. "It's not different," he admitted quietly. "It's exactly the same thing. I made you look incompetent and insignificant because I needed to believe that I was the successful one in our marriage." The admission hung between us like a confession. It was the most honest thing Derek had said to me in 3 years, and it revealed the core of our problem, his need to diminish me in order to elevate himself. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you need to believe that?" Derek's hands fidgeted with his coffee cup as he considered the question. "Because if you were successful, really successful, then what did that make me?
Just another investment banker in an expensive suit? Just another guy who peaked in his 20s and never lived up to his own expectations? The vulnerability in his admission was startling. For the first time, I was seeing past Derek's carefully constructed image to the insecurity that drove his behavior. "You could have been proud of me," I said softly. "You could have been excited about being married to someone who built something remarkable. Instead, you chose to pretend I was failing so you could feel superior." "I know." His voice cracked slightly. "I know, and I hate myself for it. Natasha, I want to fix this. I want to learn how to be proud of your success instead of threatened by it. I want to be the kind of husband who supports your ambitions instead of dismissing them." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but all I saw was exhaustion and genuine regret. "What would that look like, Derek? How exactly do you propose to fix 3 years of dismissal and condescension?"
He leaned forward slightly, his eyes intense with what looked like hope. "We start over. We have real conversations about your work, about your goals, about your plans for Cascade Solutions. I learn about the business you've built. I support your expansion into Europe. I become the partner you deserve instead of the obstacle I've been." The words were everything I had wanted to hear for 3 years. They were also completely inadequate to address the fundamental problem in our marriage. "Derek," I said gently, "the issue isn't that you don't know about my business. The issue is that you didn't want to know. For 3 years, every time I tried to share my work with you, you changed the subject or made it clear that you weren't interested. You didn't accidentally overlook my success. You actively ignored it because it didn't fit the story you wanted to tell about our marriage." His face crumpled slightly as the truth of my words sank in. "I can change," he said desperately. "People can change, Natasha. I can learn to be different." "Can you?" I asked. "Can you really learn to celebrate my success when it overshadows yours? Can you learn to be proud of being married to someone who makes more money than you do, who has built something bigger than anything you've achieved? Can you learn to introduce me as the CEO of Cascade Solutions instead of just my wife?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Derek wanted to change, but wanting and being able were two different things. His need to be the dominant success in our relationship wasn't just a bad habit. It was fundamental to how he saw himself. "I don't know," he whispered finally. "I want to say yes, but I don't know if I'm strong enough." The honesty of his answer was devastating and oddly respectful. For the first time in our marriage, Derek was telling me the complete truth about his limitations. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "Thank you for saying that, for finally being honest with me." "Does that mean—" Hope flickered in his eyes. "It means I understand now that this isn't something we can fix with better communication or couples counseling. This is about who you are and who you need me to be in order to feel good about yourself." Derek's shoulders sagged as he processed the finality in my tone. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I've done a terrible job of showing it, but I do love you. I know you do, but you love the version of me that makes you feel successful. You don't know how to love the version of me that actually is successful." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 3 years of misunderstanding settling between us like a physical presence. Finally, Derek spoke. "What happens now?" I looked at this man I had married, this person who had shared my bed and my home, while never really seeing me, and felt a deep sadness for what we had almost been. Now we both get to find out who we really are when we're not trying to fit into each other's expectations. 6 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office in the Riverside Business District, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the city I had called home for nearly a decade. The view was spectacular, a panorama of glass towers and tree-lined streets that stretched toward the harbor. But what struck me most
was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of tension. For the first time in 3 years, I woke up each morning without the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on my shoulders, without the need to minimize my achievements or apologize for my ambitions, without the exhausting performance of being less than I was. The divorce had been surprisingly civilized. Derek, perhaps motivated by his desire to minimize further professional embarrassment, had agreed to mediation rather than a protracted court battle. The settlement was straightforward. I kept Cascade Solutions and the assets I had built before our marriage. He kept his retirement accounts and the BMW, and we split the equity in the house that had never really felt like home anyway. What struck me most about the process was Derek's behavior throughout. Gone was the angry, desperate man from the terrace at Thornfield Manor. In its place was someone quieter, more reflective, who seemed to understand that fighting the inevitable would only deepen his humiliation. During our final mediation session, he had looked at me with something that resembled respect, perhaps the first time he had ever truly seen me as an equal. "I hope you know I never wanted to hurt you," he had said as we signed the final papers. "I know," I had replied. "You just needed me to be smaller so you could feel bigger." He had nodded, accepting the truth of it without argument. It was, oddly, one of the most honest moments of our entire relationship. Now, 6 months later, the business world had adjusted to the new reality with the pragmatic efficiency I had always admired about commerce. The initial gossip about the Pemberton divorce had faded into background noise, replaced by more current scandals and successes. What remained was a clearer understanding of who Natasha Pemberton actually was, both professionally and personally.
Cascade Solutions had thrived in ways I hadn't dared to imagine during my marriage. Without the need to downplay our achievements or avoid attention that might embarrass Derek, I had been able to pursue opportunities that had been off limits before. The European expansion was ahead of schedule, with offices in London and Amsterdam already generating substantial revenue. The Whitmore Ventures investment had provided the capital to hire 30 additional employees and acquire 2 smaller consulting firms that specialized in artificial intelligence integration. More importantly, I had discovered the joy of being publicly successful. For years, I had hidden my achievements to protect Derek's ego. But now I could accept speaking engagements, participate in industry panels, and mentor young entrepreneurs without worrying about how it would reflect on my husband's reputation. The phone on my desk buzzed, interrupting my morning reflection. My assistant, Sarah's, voice came through the intercom with the kind of controlled excitement that meant good news. "Natasha, I have Richard Morrison on line 1. He says it's about the Singapore expansion proposal." I smiled as I picked up the phone. The Singapore project represented Cascade Solutions' entry into the Asian market, a move that would more than double our international revenue within 2 years. "Richard, good morning. I hope you have good news for me." Better than good. Richard's voice was warm with satisfaction. The Morrison Industries board voted unanimously to approve the expansion partnership. We're looking at a 5-year contract worth $18 million with built-in escalation clauses that could push it past $25 million. I had learned to accept these numbers without the shock that had once accompanied major business victories. Success, I had discovered, was something you could grow into, but only when you weren't constantly apologizing for it. "That's wonderful news, Richard. When do we start?" "Next month." "And Natasha, I have to tell you, the board was particularly impressed by your presentation last week. They said it was one of the most comprehensive market analysis reports they'd ever seen. You should be proud." After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. $25 million. In 5 years, I had built a company that could secure contracts worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. And for the first time, there was no voice in my head minimizing the achievement or suggesting it was somehow inappropriate. A knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts. Jessica Chen,
the business journalist who had witnessed Derek's meltdown at the networking event, stood in the doorway with her familiar digital recorder and notepad. "I hope you don't mind the unscheduled visit," she said with a smile. "I was in the building interviewing the CEO of Meridian Tech, and I thought I'd stop by to see how the follow-up story is developing." 6 months ago, Jessica had published a feature article about my company that had become one of Metro Commerce Weekly's most read pieces of the year. The story, titled "The Hidden Success: How One Entrepreneur Built a $1 Million Company in Plain Sight," had generated international attention and led to speaking invitations from business schools across the country. "Please, come in," I said, gesturing toward the chairs arranged around a small conference table by the windows, "though I'm not sure there's much new to report since your last article." Jessica laughed as she settled into her chair. "Are you kidding? The Singapore expansion, the AI acquisitions, the European success? There's enough material for a whole series. But that's not actually why I'm here. I'm working on a larger piece about entrepreneurship and personal relationships, how success affects marriages, how couples navigate different levels of achievement, that sort of thing. Your story keeps coming up in my research as an example of what happens when those dynamics go wrong." I considered her request carefully. In the months since the divorce, I had been selective about discussing the personal aspects of my story. Business success was one thing. The dissolution of my marriage was something entirely different. "What would you want to focus on?" "Honestly, the lesson in it. You built something remarkable while hiding it from the person closest to you. Your husband's been years dismissing your achievements while his own career depended partly on your success. There's something there about authenticity, about the cost of living smaller than you are." She was right, of course. The story wasn't just about a marriage that failed, it was about what happened when you allowed someone else's insecurities to define your possibilities. You know what the strangest part is? I thought I was being a supportive wife by hiding my success. I thought I was protecting Derek's feelings by letting him believe that he was the accomplished one in our marriage. And now, I understand that I was actually being deeply disrespectful to both of us. I was denying Derek the opportunity to grow into someone who could celebrate my achievements, and I was denying myself the right to be fully who I am. Jessica nodded, making notes as I spoke. "Do you think he could have grown into that person if you had been honest from the beginning?" It was a question I had asked myself countless times over the past 6 months. I don't know, maybe, but I also think some people need to be the star of their own story. And Derek was one of them. He needed a supporting cast, not a co-lead.
And you needed something different. I needed to be seen, really seen, for who I am and what I've built. I needed a partner who could be proud of my success instead of threatened by it. Through the windows, I could see the lunch crowd beginning to fill the sidewalks of Riverside District. Professionals in expensive suits hurrying between meetings, entrepreneurs sitting at cafe tables with laptops and coffee, students from the nearby university carrying backpacks and dreams. It was a world full of people pursuing their ambitions without apology. And for the first time in my adult life, I was truly one of them. "One final question," Jessica said, checking her recorder. "Any regrets?" I thought about Derek, probably sitting in his office at Hartwell and Associates at this very moment, still dealing with the professional fallout from our marriage's public dissolution. I thought about the 3 years we had spent together, the moments of genuine connection that had existed alongside the fundamental misunderstanding of who we were to each other. "I regret that we both wasted time trying to be people we weren't," I said finally. "But I don't regret the outcome. Derek gets to find someone who wants to be his supporting character, and I get to be the protagonist of my own story." After Jessica left, I returned to the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, in another office building, Derek was probably reviewing quarterly projections and attending client meetings, slowly rebuilding his reputation one professional interaction at a time. I hoped he was finding his way to contentment, even if it looked different from what either of us had imagined.
As for me, I had learned that success without authenticity was just an elaborate performance, that hiding your achievements to protect someone else's ego was a form of betrayal, both to yourself and to them, that the right person would celebrate your victories instead of feeling diminished by them. My phone buzzed with a text from Cameron. The Singapore team wants to schedule a video conference for tomorrow morning. Also, Harvard Business School confirmed your guest lecture for next month. I smiled as I typed back, schedule them both. And Cameron, add a note to my calendar for next week. It's time to start planning the IPO. 18 months ago, Derek had called me a failure at a family dinner. Tonight, I was the CEO of a company preparing to go public with a valuation north of $50 million. He had demanded I accept reality. I had, just not the reality he'd imagined. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.